We are back. We are better than ever. We are talking about China again. Let's get right into it. We're talking about the new dynasties, the Sui, the Tang, the Song. Okay, to slow it down a little bit, let's remember the last Chinese dynasty we talked about was the Han, which many people consider to be the pinnacle dynasty ever. But unfortunately, the Han, as many empires do, broke down. There was chaos, there was war, there was banditry everywhere. The picture on the right, just fighting and fighting, and the nomads, and they're breaking stuff. But finally, it all comes back. In the year 581, a man by the name of Jian is able to conquer many rivals that were floating around in this area and reestablish a dynasty, and that was the Sui dynasty. Now, as you can see here, it's very short, 581 to 618. We're only looking at about 35 years or so, actually 37 years, but they'll be very, very important. After Yang Jian took power, he took the title the Emperor Wen and got to wear cool hats, because if you are an emperor, you must wear cool hats. It's a rule, look it up. So, what was so crucial about these guys? Well, here's the deal. They will reestablish strong power. They will have an empire set up much like the first emperor with lots of taxes. And this taxation was all about control. The emperor would rule by decree. The peasants, their job was to farm and support the military and the emperor. And they also instituted this idea of a required labor or compulsory labor that existed every year, that you would have to spend a certain amount of your time working for the government. But they also would work on the infrastructure, build better roads. They're going to build canals, which I'm going to talk about, which would allow for better trade. But the key thing is they restored the dynasties. They put China back into a position where it would have a run all the way through the Ming Dynasty of having just an absolutely incredible empire, which at one point would really be the strongest in the world. And even though they had some slip-ups in the 1800s and 1700s and early 1900s, they are going to get themselves established as a world power. And the Sui dynasty is what restored that. Probably the most impactful thing they did was the building of the Grand Canal. The Grand Canal is thousands of miles long. As you can see on the left, it goes from Beijing down to Hangzhou. That should give you an idea of how large it is if you look at modern-day China today, because this, by the way, is still used. It's an incredible thing, thousands of miles long, built by hand, dug out with shovels. And as you can see, it started up here, worked its way down. Here was kind of your main canal. Okay, and then you had some offshoots, and then they would have other little canals, like here's another little canal over here, another little canal over here. But what it did was foster internal trade and growth, was able to keep China as part of that Silk Roads that we've already learned about, and really was the pinnacle achievement. And here's what it looks like today. You would think that's a river. This is running right to the outside of Beijing, and this is actually a canal. Now, unfortunately, the Sui did not last long, and why did they not last? One, they ran into stuff, as you see the poor steeplechaser over there. But two, it was their military. Unfortunately, they wanted to expand, and they just took some beatings. They tried to expand into northern China or Manchuria, and then they tried to expand into Korea. They were able to subjugate some of Manchuria, but the Korean campaign cost them thousands of soldiers that they just weren't prepared. Now, because they had all these high taxes and compulsory labor, not surprisingly, the citizens didn't like them very much. So they saw an opportunity to revolt, and you would start to get revolts, and then eventually the second emperor, the Emperor Yang, would be assassinated, and shortly after that, a new dynasty would be established. But the Sui are crucial. Remember why, if you have to rewind, because I'm not going to tell you again, because you need to listen. Okay, but now that you have the Sui are gone, they are taken over by the Tang. And from 618 to 907, the Tang would expand like no other dynasty had before them. They are established by this man by the name of Tang Taizong, and Tang Taizong was incredibly intelligent. He eased the taxes on the peasants. He then ended the compulsory labor, and was able to just, kind of take a scale back from the harshness that had existed before him. Now, what was so impressive about the Tang was their administration. Here, of course, on the right is the picture of the city of Chang'an. We've talked about that already and its glory and its growth. But the key thing was getting back to Confucianism, okay? Let's open up the schools. Let's rule or have people in the government that are able to uh, have an education and rule or get the opportunity to be in the government because of merit. We want the best people in the best jobs. Sure, was there some corruption? Sure, was there some favoritism? But in the end, they got good people in there, and it allowed for an efficient government and a smart government and a well-run government. They then would expand transportation. We already had the canals being built. They would continue to build and grow them. But along with that, they developed roads. They started a system in which you would still allow people to travel from place to place. These roads were marked, they were mapped, they started to use horses more, and then they improved communication. It was in China that we have some of the world's first postal stations. Those are created there. You have the origins, if you will, of the Persian Express. Remember, we said not the Pony Express that we used out in the West, but that the Persians started horses going from spot to spot, and carrying messages along the way. The Chinese would do this as well, and so now you've got good government, you've got transportation, you've got great trade, and then let's equal the playing field, the equal field system. This was remarkable. This was a system of making sure that land was redistributed properly and nobody had too much. Now, did you still have nobles with a high amount of land? Sure. Just like I said that the nobles had some corruption when it came to getting people in power, say, despite the system in which was established under Confucianism. But in this case, you've got lots of peasants with more land, which means they can still pay taxes and food, still have enough food for themselves, and still have food to sell, which of course, as long as you have a strong agricultural base, you then have a strong trade base. And that's a pretty cool looking form. That's a terraced rice farm. We'll talk about how they're able to do that later as well. But the key thing here is now that we've got all that, let's dump all our resources into the army and spread. And look at this. They go from the Pacific Ocean over here all the way. I mean, you're talking about up into Kazakhstan. I mean, Kashmir. We're out by Pakistan. We're almost by Pakistan at this point. This is an incredibly huge empire. Remember, we said if it wasn't for the Battle of Talas, in which the Muslims were able to stop them, who knows how long these guys would have gone. So just an incredible empire that lasted for about 300 years. What was different about them as well, if I go back real quick, not only, so this is the area that was actually their land, but if you see all this area like here, the Uyghur, the Mongols, the Khitan, down here the Champa and the Chenla, they were also kind of under influence of China in this idea of the Middle Kingdom, in which they will occupy certain areas, but then what they can do is basically have other areas become subject nations, much like a territory or a colony, if you will. So not only did China control almost all of modern day China, but many of the surrounding areas. But the real key thing was just the obeisances to the emperor. They started this process called the Kowtow, which, as you can see, these people, when you meet the emperor, this would actually be the emperor right here, that you would grovel, you would kiss the ground, because the Chinese are the greatest and their emperor is the highest on high. But it doesn't last forever. Starting in 755 to 763, you actually had your first revolt of a rival family, the An Lushan revolt, this guy right here, who actually was able to take a large amount of cities, but eventually the Tang cut a deal with the nomads, the Uyghurs, in order to get rid of An Lushan, kill him, and destroy his revolt. However, the problem is then the Uyghurs, in order to not say attack them, they demanded that the Chinese pay them a ransom for their help or else risk attack. So then the Tang have to start paying off the Uyghurs. The other problem that you start to have is they got too big. We talked about this for Rome, particularly way to the western portions of their empire. The regional governors in the areas that were north of India and past the Gobi Desert will start to break away. And then you have the biggest revolt, which was the Hong Chao Rebellion in 874 to 884. This is near the end here. That it was actually bigger than the An Lushan rebellion. At one point, they captured the city of Chang'an, but ladies and gentlemen, here it comes again, disease. His army gets hit with what we think is the plague, absolutely devastating. And what ends up happening there is that his army takes a huge hit. People start to doubt his leadership. And in the end, in order to try to save their own skins, his nephew actually assassinates him, so much for family, to try to cut a deal with the emperor. But in the end, they all just fall apart. The western provinces leave. There's still more revolts. And in the end, the final emperor actually is just forced out and deposed. Which leads us to our final empire. Now, the Tang Empire, if you remember from the beginning, will last until 907. So what we end up having is about a 50-year period in which you have these warlords, different type of people trying to control areas, until finally the Song, or sometimes called the Sung Empire, is reestablished in the year 960. Now, if you look at the map, you have two areas. You have the northern Sung and the southern Sung. The northern Sung contains all of this darker orange land plus the southern Sung, and that lasted from 960 to 1126. They're going to lose some influence and lose some land starting in 1127, which I'll explain, before they will finally fall. Now, these guys were really interesting. They saw the military as actually one of the major problems that China had, and that it was costing a lot of money. And so what they instead of did is they took money out of the military, but in a way this was good because it also prevented some of those regional governors from getting a strong power base, and they really focused on administration. One of the ways that they provided really good administration was that they opened up public schooling. China had some of the first public schools in the world set up during this time. So you could be absolutely abjectively poor, but if your family allowed you to go to school, which would be free, you could move up and actually really establish a good life for yourself. The way they dealt with generals and other military threats is through bribes. I mean, they called them gifts, but they would give them money, they would give them land, but everything centered around the emperor. So it kind of worked in the sense that people knew they were getting bribed. Everybody else just listened to the emperor. He could remove people from positions at any time, and then could keep up the bribes with other people to make sure that they wouldn't attack them. It was really impressive what they were able to do to keep everybody at bay. Eventually, though, they are going to lose much of the north to the Khitan people. They were northern Chinese that were able to come in and take off a big chunk of the empire. Sometimes they're even called the Northern Song. Not to be confused with the actual Song, but in the end, the Khitan will take a pretty big chunk out of them. Now, the Song also brought some really cool stuff. The first was the first attempt at paper money. This would be really important for us. It initially failed, but they'll fix it and it'll end up working well later. They also developed one of the world's first standing navies, which was really impressive. It had been a long time since we really had that. You got to really go back to, say, the Athenians. And the population will boom up to 100 million people. This will be the first country, if you will, that sees 100 million people in a population. And then the Mongols show up. And I mean, at this point, do I even have to say, But what will be very interesting, and we'll talk about them later, not only do the Mongols show up and capture them, but they will set up a dynasty of their own. So again, as you see here, really impressive run. China is still back. Even though they get conquered by the Mongols, the dynasties will survive, and we'll talk about some great achievements of them in the next video. Get your questions, get your comments, and I'll see you tomorrow.